It's great to see both current CMN members and new faces here with us tonight. Before we dive in, just a quick reminder, which most of you have already seen, that the program is being recorded. We would love to see everyone's bright shining faces on screen, but feel free to turn off your camera if you like. My name is Paula Romali, and I am a CMN co-leader, along with Roger Hurd, Susie Lewis, Becky Munson, and Carol Seiler, and all of us are here tonight, so everyone give a wave, co-leaders. So CMN stands for State Elections Empower Democracy in Minnesota, and we formed in 2022 and became one of 15 Minnesota giving circles that were part of this newish organization called the States Project. So together, those 15 Minnesota giving circles raised over $1.6 million for Minnesota state legislative races in 2022. So both the large amount and also the unique ways those dollars were deployed by the States Project had a huge impact in terms of flipping the Minnesota State Senate and helping to create a DFL governing trifecta. And as most of us know, that trifecta proceeded to enact over 75 transformative bills this past session. So in tonight's program, we'll explain the work of the States Project, particularly in Minnesota, and particularly looking towards 2024. We'll also talk about how CMN members help fuel that work, and also about some other options that we have for members to advocate for important issues, and also just to socialize and discuss politics. Usually, we try through a lens of hope and positivity, which are things that I think most of us can use a little bit more of these days. In the end, Seed Minnesota donations of dollars and deeds are making a big impact, and we hope tonight's program will inspire new folks to join us and current members to consider deepening your engagement as we move into 2024 with pragmatic hope, optimism, and action. And we have three terrific speakers who are going to help us do that tonight. First, we're going to hear from Melissa Walker, the wonderful National Director of Giving Circles for the States Project. Thank you, Melissa, for taking the time to be here and to Zoom in with us from New York City. Melissa will be followed by CMN co-leader Roger Hurd. He's only Zooming in from Minneapolis. And then we'll go to our final and very special guest, Minnesota State Senator Erin Murphy. We are honored and grateful to the senator for joining us after House Majority Leader Jamie Long was unexpectedly called out of town. After all of our speakers finish, we'll take questions and wrap sometime between 7:45 and 8 p.m. And speaking of questions, please type yours into the chat box because that will really help us get to as many as possible. Again, I really want to thank you on behalf of myself and all the other CMN co-leaders for being with us here tonight. With that, I'm going to turn over my Hollywood Square to Melissa Walker, Director of Giving Circles for the States Project.
Thanks, Paula, and thanks all the co-leaders of CMN. We are so happy to have you working with us. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for asking me. So I'm going to share a little bit about the States Project generally, and then I will zero in on Minnesota. So my path to the States Project was a odd one, I would say. I was writing children's books, young adult and middle grade novels. That was my career in the fall of 2016 when there was, as you may remember, a big national election that, shook me to the core. And I thought, well, maybe the world doesn't need another children's book, but what does it need and what can I do? So I was looking for ways to plug in when I was lucky enough to attend a holiday party where I heard New York State Senator Daniel Squadron speak. And everything he said lit a path to action for me, because what I started to understand was that everything that I was worried about and everything that I cared about was being decided in state capitals and not in Washington, D.C. From education funding to environmental policy to healthcare to civil rights to the cores of our democracy, voting rights and gerrymandering, the drawing of the district lines that decide who goes to Congress and decide who goes to the state legislature, all in the hands of who has the majority in state capitals. And once I realized that, it really galvanized me to get together with friends and family and start learning more about state legislatures. Because the other thing that Daniel Squadron said that night was, it is often cheaper to change the balance of power in a state chamber than it is to win a single competitive congressional seat. Congressional races cost millions and millions of dollars, and state legislative races do not. So he said to us that night in a room in Brooklyn Heights that if the 70 of us got together and focused on trying to win a state legislature, that we could be one of the most powerful forces to walk into that state. So we took him up on that challenge as a group of children's book authors from Brooklyn, and started raising pledges, and eventually raised around $100,000, and called him back and said, we've got some real money together. What can we do with it? And he said, I've been giving that speech for 10 years. No one's ever done anything. And we said, well, we've done something. We're ready to go. We've got pledges. Our friends are good for it. We can do this. And he said, well, hang on. And then a few months later, he resigned from the New York State Senate to start the States Project. And that was the summer of 2017. And we went into Virginia that year to try to flip the House of Delegates, and were able to invest in 10 races, and 9 of those flipped. And balance of power got so close in Virginia that the next year Virginia expanded Medicaid, and 400,000 people in Virginia got healthcare who hadn't had it before. We felt connected to those policy outcomes and felt like we had really found a way where our living rooms and our neighborhoods and our friends and colleagues could make a difference. And so we committed to doing the Giving Circle for another year. And I said, Daniel, I want to meet all the people who heard you speak and started these wonderful Giving Circles. And he said, no one else did it. And I said, oh no, this is the most powerful thing I've ever done. This is the most impactful I've ever felt. More people have to do it. And he said, do you think you could get more people to do it? And I said, maybe. And so that was when I stopped writing children's books. I put down my pen and decided to do this full time. I started the Giving Circles program at the States Project. And at some point, I think it was Becky who found us to decide to see if we could start a Giving Circle that was focused on Minnesota. And luckily, in 2022, Minnesota was one of our target states. So that's really how Seed MN came into existence too. But the reason we focus on state legislatures, in addition to all of those things that I talked about at the beginning,
for President Xi.
Oh, that probably doesn't have.
Domestically,
Probably doesn't have.
want to do it.
Can you put your phone, or can you put yours on mute?
It's not going to work. I can't hear it.
Officials are very attuned to the fact that there are serious economic problems.
Becky, just mute everybody, and then Melissa can unmute herself.
I got it. I found it.
Great. So the reason why we focus on state legislatures, in addition to all of those kitchen table issues that I mentioned, is that state legislatures have a unique power over not only those local issues, but also over federal power because of their control of voting rights and gerrymandering. And I always say this three-parter. If you care about Congress, you should care about state legislatures because they draw the district lines that decide who goes to Congress. And if you care about the Supreme Court, you should care about state legislatures because the Supreme Court doesn't write laws. They rule on laws, most of which are coming out of state legislatures. It was a Mississippi law that took down Roe, and if that one hadn't done it, there were 16 other states that had passed abortion bans right after Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed, with the explicit intention of rising up to the Supreme Court to challenge Roe. That was happening in state capitals. And if you care about the presidency, you should care about state capitals, because not only do state legislatures decide who can vote and when and how, and when to purge the rolls and change the voting laws, etc., but also because the right-wing plan to send fake slates of electors in 2020 ran directly through state legislatures. So it was state legislative majorities, majority members who were called in from Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona to Washington, D.C. in an effort to throw the presidential election. So these are places that really operate in darkness because most folks don't know who goes to their state legislature for them. I still repeatedly ask my friends and family, and most of them still aren't sure, even though they know that question's coming every time they see me. Oh, Melissa, I forgot to look it up. Oh, I can't remember. Oh gosh, is it someone bad? And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Just know who they are, because these are the people who are deciding whether women can have abortions in your state. These are the people who are deciding whether your state has expanded Medicaid or not. These are the people who are deciding on civil rights in your state, whether you have LGBTQ plus protections, all of those things. So what we've seen happen in Minnesota after this shift is absolutely incredible. And those are the types of policy outcomes that got my group in Brooklyn to feel connected to people in Virginia, to feel connected to, the improving lives in other states that weren't even our own. And so that's what Giving Circles do. Some of them are in their own states. Some of them are in other states. I know Seed Minnesota helped us out a little bit in Virginia this year. Thank you so much for that, because we just flipped the House of Delegates in Virginia and protected the state Senate by 1 seat in each chamber, putting a wall in front of Governor Youngkin, who is a real threat to democracy and people's rights. So that was an incredible victory last week, and you all were a part of that too. And what I love about that is it is people understanding that this is our country. And we don't want these 50 state borders to feel like country borders. I don't want to have to think about whether my 2 daughters are going to go to college in a state where they have fewer rights than the one they grew up in. This is our country. And that's why we reach across states to help each other. So I pulled together some things. There were 35 Minnesota Giving Circles last year. And I believe 4 of them were from Minnesota, and 31 of them were from other parts of the country that chose Minnesota, that had a connection to Minnesota from schools or growing up or somewhere along the way. And I love that. I love that people are reaching out across state lines and doing that and helping people. So the way that we work at the States Project is we do a 99 state chamber analysis every year. 99 because Nebraska is unicameral, which is a great piece of trivia for you to store away for your next really nerdy party. And we do that chamber analysis to try to figure out where a power shift is possible. We then zero in on those chambers where we think it's possible, and we go district by district to try to figure out which are the targets we need to tip the balance of power, to get the exact number of seats we need to shift majorities. So in Minnesota, we were working on, in 2022, working on defending the state house and flipping the state Senate. And we look for districts where maybe a Democrat has won statewide, and so we're looking for a district that has a Republican representative where a Democrat has won statewide, that kind of thing. We're looking at demographic shifts. We're looking at redrawn lines, those sorts of things. And another thing that we look for, and that I think is important to talk about, because I'm going to talk about a little bit in the forward motion section, is that we look for candidates who might outperform their districts. So in Minnesota in 2022, we always knew that local broadcasters, specifically weather people, do really well when running for state legislature. They can really outperform in districts. So in 2022, we knew that in Senate District 4, Rob Kupek, am I saying that right? Yes, that he was a weatherman on broadcast television for more than 20 years, and even though his district had been redistricted to be a right-wing victory, we were like, he can outperform. So aligning on those targets and figuring out we need these districts and who's running in these districts, that is an important piece of our work. So that was a district where he was able to hold a right seat that had just been a right-wing seat, a seat that had been redistricted for the right wing by 1,700 votes. That was incredibly important. And something that we kind of look for in our research. So that is how we zero in to figure out which districts we need to be in, where we need to invest. We promise our Giving Circles that 100% of the amount they raise goes out the door to the state that they choose. Our organization is funded by other donors outside of the Giving Circles program, and the Giving Circles are organizing and working for us. So we appreciate that a lot and want to make sure 100% goes out the door. And we also work to pair Giving Circles with the campaigns at the point where actions like phone banking and postcarding and door knocking makes the most sense. Usually it's in the fall, right before the election, when folks start doing that. But I know everyone at Seed MN was pretty on top of that all the way around. So you didn't need any of our help to partner with the local campaigns because you all know everyone. But for our other giving circles, we set that up so that folks can do that. And we were the largest state legislative funder in Minnesota in 2022. We really wanted to refuse to leave any opportunity on the table. We knew that winning the state Senate majority was possible, and we wanted to make sure that the focus was not just on defending the state House, which was also important, but we thought that flipping the Senate was possible. So we were on the ground early for 2022 because Giving Circles helped us raise dollars in January to help hire staff. And that was really important because we were able to invest ahead of the session starting. And once the session starts, investments pause. So early dollars in Minnesota mean a lot. And what we've been working on this year in Minnesota is we want to ensure that the caucuses are able, we work with the state caucuses, so the state Senate caucus, the state House caucus, obviously it's the House this time around, and we want to ensure that the caucus is able to hire staff before the presidential and congressional campaigns swoop up the top talent, the top political talent. So staffing up is really important. It's critical. And we learned that, of course, in 2022 in Minnesota when we staffed up early on the ground. And that ensured that there were people ready to go months ahead of when they might have been hired if we hadn't been able to fund early. And Minnesota doesn't do a ton of political work in the off year. The same staff that supports the elections actually supports policymaking in the off year, so it switches over and then goes back to being political staff in the election year. We know that in Minnesota they've just hired their political director for the 2024 campaign, and we've been working with folks. Our political director, our regional political director, Emily Wagner, has been working on folks with recruitment, working on recruitment with folks, working with leadership to identify priority recruitment districts, and sharing a bunch of data that we have gathered on attributes that typically indicate overperforming candidates. That's based on our research from last year. Those include really obvious things like folks who hold elected office are usually good candidates because they've got a lot of name recognition, but there's also some nuanced attributes. Like we've found that attending high school and college in the area adds to a candidate's performance. Owning a business in the district, having a known family name. We often around the office call this being state ledge famous. And being state ledge famous could mean having been a football coach in the area, having been a PTA president for many years and signing a lot of letters home, or of course the gold standard, being a weather person, a local weather person. So these are all things that can help folks outperform and things that we look at when we know which target districts we really need to recruit well in. And that's what Emily has really been working on with the caucus in this 2023 year. And for 2024, our first step is to work on staffing up. So that is what we're working on. That is what we're doing. And I just want to give a really, really big shout out to SeedMN for being, one of our biggest Minnesota giving circles for sure, and certainly our most energetic and active giving circle. I think you've met many, many members of our staff at this point and talked to a lot of folks, and we just appreciate all the energy and joy that you bring. And the folks who chose Minnesota, who live outside of the state, continually mention you all as, where SeedMN, we want to talk to them again. Those folks in Minnesota, they really find you all incredibly inspiring and really, really appreciate all the work that you're doing. So thank you, thank you, thank you for that. And I will leave you with one final thought, which is that in 2024, I think we will see a lot of emotional political dollars going out the door. We will see people reacting and getting scared and getting worried and, maybe watching a commercial that makes you cry. But what I always say is friends don't let friends give non-strategic political donations. And so know that supporting Seed Minnesota means supporting the target districts that we need to hold and deepen power in Minnesota and keep those Minnesota miracles coming. Because of course, at the end of the day, what we are looking for is electing majorities that are focused on improving people's lives and then helping them pass the policies that do just that and helping people feel it. So thank you all for engaging in this work and for doing it with us.
Thank you so much, Melissa. You are a brilliant leader, and your enthusiasm is just as contagious as it can get. Thank you so much. Okay, now we're going to hear from Roger Hurd, who is a member of the Seed Minnesota leadership team. He's going to explain to you how our Seed Minnesota Giving Circle works, and then a special component that he's in charge of. So Roger, will you speak, please?
Thank you, Becky. Thank you, Becky. Yeah, well, you got a pretty good orientation from Melissa. Obviously, Seed Minnesota is a state's project giving circle. It was founded a couple of years ago by 4 forward-thinking women, and you're seeing 3 of them here tonight, to create a community of like-minded people who are concerned about what's happening in our country and would love to be able to do something about it. So as a result, we totally bought into the state's project idea of smart focus for impact. Part of this focus is we focus on Minnesota state government, but as Melissa pointed out, we get money from other states. We got some the last time to really help us in a crunch period, and we contribute money to other states too in times when they need it. And we focus on key legislative races we can win. She mentioned that a little bit. So our work, along with that of many others, helped create the DFL trifecta in 2022, holding the governorship in both legislative bodies. And I expect you'll hear a little more about the transformational accomplishments of the 2023 legislative session. But that's really what I call impact.
So that's really done in the middle.
Let's go. Okay. So what does our community do? Well, we share ideas, we share news, resources, we make donations as we are so moved and are able. We develop opportunities for smart activism, both to assist key campaigns and to support progressive legislation. Some examples are maybe canvassing or phone banking. We have Zoom sessions to facilitate weighing in with legislators. And we like to establish relationships with our legislators to encourage their support on important issues and to get them to back specific legislation and to express our appreciation for what they're doing. Finally, my wife Tamara and I regularly host a Seed Pod meeting, which is kind of like a little subset of our whole Seed Minnesota group. About a dozen people in the metro area here to do all of these things and to enjoy some food, beverage, and one another's company. So send us an email. I posted our email address in the chat. It's seedminn, seed, M-I-N-N, @gmail.com to learn more about what we're up to or get involved. Now, we really have some great things happening in Minnesota, but at the same time, there are those who are very determined to move us in the opposite direction. Let's keep it going. Becky.
Thank you so much, Roger. Now I get to introduce Senator Erin Murphy. And Senator Murphy, I don't know if you heard earlier, we are so grateful that you were willing to step in the last minute when Jamie Long got called out of town. I just want to say about 2 things about Senator Murphy. She represents Senate District 64 in St. Paul, but she's working for all of us because guess what? This senator is the chief author of 50, that's 50, bills that going into the 2024 session. And she's got the experience to be able to do all that work. So we're so grateful you're able to join us, Senator Murphy. Tell us a little bit about successes, about potential challenges coming up, and what your objectives are for the 2024 session.
Hi, everybody. It is so lovely to see or be with you. I can't see everybody, but to be with you. It was great to listen to Melissa talking about the value of the state's project. And I just, without repeating everything she said, want to be really clear at how critically important the state's project was to our ability to win a governing majority in the Minnesota Senate. and we have a majority by 1 seat, as you probably all know, and to hold the House. And, you know, I've been involved in many campaigns now in the legislature because I'd served in the House before I served in the Senate. And every election cycle is different. And the last one was a tough one. But I think Minnesotans understood, and you especially at CDMN understood how important it was that we win the election to our freedom and to our democracy. And the work that you did to raise money, to talk with each other, to talk with others, to build support for the caucus campaigns, but more importantly, to engage Minnesotans in the work that we needed to do to win. It was beautiful. It really was. And I can't thank you enough. By now, I bet you have heard plenty of people serving in Minnesota's legislature talking about the things that we accomplished together as a result of that big election. And it was a transformative and really powerful 5 months. That was the result of many years of work. But we did. I was just at a fundraising event for a woman who's running for re-election in the Minnesota House, and I was with Speaker Hortman, and she said 10 years ago, it was a different time and people were more cautious, and what we learned in that trifecta 10 years ago is when you have power, you have to go for broke. You do, because the people who are going to campaign against you, they're going to say whatever they want. It might not be related to what you did. So it's just better to do what you believe in and do that work, and in every sector, right? Whether it is in our schools, and caring for our kids, in healthcare, in infrastructure, in housing, in every place. We did the best work that we could to propel Minnesota's future forward. And we will see the benefits of this session for years to come. And I just, again, cannot thank you enough. We did what we said we would do. We advanced reproductive freedom. We strengthened our democracy, and we will have improved the lives of the people of Minnesota. In 2024, the second and shorter year of the biennium, we will see another bonding bill. And we saw, you know, a larger than ever bonding bill, but it had been years since we had really invested in our infrastructure. So last year, more than $2 billion in infrastructure investments. We'll do one more bonding bill this year, probably a little more limited in scope, a little more limited in size, really focusing on the buildings and the things that are the state's responsibility to maintain and keep up. We call it HEAPR, but that's where I think we'll spend most of our time. In early December and again in late February, we will get a state budget forecast. And we continue to see our economy in Minnesota performing well, which means we're seeing one-time money coming in beyond what we anticipate. So we should have a bit of a surplus again, probably mostly one-time money. We do have some obligations that money will go to first. We had to do a fix in a tax proposal from last session that will take up some of that money, and if we bond, that will take some of the surplus funds. While we're borrowing for bonding, we need to lay out the debt service, so that's going to cost a little bit of money. Most of my colleagues and I have been talking a lot about making sure that the implementation of the laws that we passed goes well. We want to make sure that we didn't just pass a strong law, but that it's implemented. So each of us are doing a fair amount of work in our own jurisdictions to support the administration in their work to implement the law. And there are a few things that didn't get done last session that are awaiting our final work. So I think you will see an abbreviated, vigorous session, colored by, of course, national and international events. And I don't think we can escape the fact that the Middle East is in a war right now, and that could shape how we think and feel about not just the session, but the next election. I do want to make sure and talk briefly about the election because we are in the strong position we're in now because of the last election and because of all of the work that you have done. Thank you again. The House is gearing up for their election to hold the majority, and when they hold their majority, we will hold our trifecta. So I have been committing all over the place to support the House reelect because their success is our success together, which is why I was just at a fundraising event for one of my House colleagues who's going to run for re-election. The House is feeling good about the campaign that they're standing up, and I can't agree with Melissa more that recruiting strong candidates and making sure that we have staff on the ground early are two really critical elements in preparing to win an election. And I'm so glad to know States Project is working with the House to do those things. States Project was influential in making sure those things were set up for us, especially the funding, the early funding to hire staff, to make sure we could support candidates like Rob Kupek, the meteorologist from Moorhead, who's doing a really, really fabulous job. I think it will be a potentially challenging election, mostly because it's a presidential race and they influence so much of the narrative that we have to compete within. So the voter turnout will be higher because it's a presidential race. We don't know quite who our candidates are going to be, although I'm certain Joe Biden will be the candidate on the DFL side. But we've got some months to go before we know that field. So that's going to be an influencer, and then international events will be an influencer for us, which is why it's important to recruit early and get candidates up and running early so they can lay down a foundation with the people who they hope will vote for them, and they don't get caught up necessarily in the national and international narrative. We want to be able to, as much as we can, make sure our candidates are able to speak for themselves, which is why the work that you do to raise money, Seed Minnesota, is so important, because it supports the candidates. It supports all of our ability to talk about the things and to listen, prepare to govern, but get ourselves elected first. So I think it's going to be a very, very exciting year. We've just come off an election in St. Paul and in Minneapolis and in Duluth. So I think people have got to rest just a little bit, but just a little bit, because we need to get back to work, get into the session, do the work we need to do, and get into the campaign trail so we can hold the trifecta, continue to protect our freedom and our democracy. And I am excited to do that work with you now and into the future. And I'm so happy that Jamie Long had to go out of town so I could be his substitute speaker tonight.
Thank you so much, Senator Murphy. We've got a question here that could be addressed by each of you, Melissa and Senator Murphy. So the first part is, how does the States Project research the issues of targeting districts that could flip or defend a tight district? And then someone else submitted this one, Senator Murphy, can we identify certain House seats that we should most assist? So Melissa, do you want to take it first?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So the first thing we do is, like, we really don't, run our own programs. We partner with the state caucus and with the candidates. So it's always our local partners leading on messaging and what's happening in the districts. Now, something that we put a really strong lens on with candidates is door knocking. And what I mean by door knocking is not just the campaign's door knocking, but the candidates themselves knocking on doors. It is a huge lens for us. And in fact, in many states, not Minnesota, but in many states, we are able to run a door knocking challenge where we actually help fund the top door knockers, and they compete against each other to see who can knock on the most doors. And the story, a very quick story that I want to tell about that is, it's one of our layered tactics, because when you get the candidates out knocking on doors instead of dialing for dollars, it gets them much more into the flow of what they're hearing in the district, and it helps with messaging, especially if they start knocking early. So in Pennsylvania in 2022, we were running a door knocking challenge. After the election, we found that the candidates involved in that challenge knocked on 5 times as many doors as candidates who were not involved in the challenge. And that is thousands and thousands more doors. And what we also help folks do, and what we did in Minnesota too, was help make sure that every ad that's going up has been ad tested with local voters in the district to make sure that it resonates locally. So this is the type of layered tactics that can really move the needle in these campaigns. And my point in telling that story is, local folks lead, the candidate knocking on doors and gathering information about what the district's talking about is an incredibly important part of our program. And then doing ad testing within the district on the ads that are going to run is an especially important part too, because ads are expensive. And in 2022, we really did support historic investments in television ads that were unique to each district and tested with in-district voters before they aired in critical media markets. So that means that that investment is tested before it goes out. We know that the message is resonant. And state legislative candidates, I believe, had never before been on broadcast television in Minnesota. So that was a big deal. And I'm going to share a link to our impact report that tells a lot more stories because I'm full of them, but I don't want to take up all your time. So I'll stop now.
Thank you. So, Senator Murphy, I think you can tell that some people are kind of chomping at the bit to get to work. Hence that follow-up question, can we identify certain House seats that we should most assist?
So it's been a little bit since I've talked with Jamie Long. When we were together earlier this year in Chicago, we started talking through the places where they are looking to recruit strong candidates and run probably in targeted seats. So no surprise to you, in the East and the West Metro, I think they have some key pickup spots in both the East and the West Metro, and probably potentially one in the North Metro. Carrie Rayrauer, who ran for the Senate in the last cycle, is going to run for Jerry Newton's seat, and she really grew into her candidacy. That's not a shoo-in for a seat, so that is a place. I know that they're looking up north in the two seats that they lost in Senate District 3, so 3A and 3B, which would be new candidates. And Jamie felt good about those seats, in part because both of the incumbents lost by very narrow margins. So I think this is, it's always an important question. I am not a big fan of just ticking up the numbers, because I think who the candidate is really makes a difference. So it might be a district that looks like it is ripe for pickup, but you might not have a great candidate. Or you might have a great candidate in a district that isn't as strong and they win. So it is, I think, that combination of things. When did they get in the race? Are they, what did Melissa call them? State legislative rock star? Do they have a profile? Yeah, state legislative. Okay. So do they have a profile that lifts them up in such a way that they're able to, break through a number? So when you gather again with Jamie, he's going to, or with Melissa Hortman, they're going to be able to give you a better run around that table to make sure that you're really clear about where to give. Carrie Rayrauer is a top choice for me. And then I do want to say, I didn't mention this, but it is very, very, very likely that we will have a special election in the Minnesota Senate, as Kelly Morrison has decided to run for the U.S. Congress in CD3, which will create a vacancy if she is successful, and I suspect she will be. We'll have a vacancy in Senate District 45 in the West Metro. So you'll see me camping there and making sure that we are winning that seat. It's a very winnable seat for us, but, special elections, they can always surprise us. So, we have to be ready in the Minnesota Senate. And I just want to flag that for you, because it is that one seat that if we lost, we would lose the majority, which we will not do. We will not squander this majority. And so I just want to put that on your radar, because eventually I think that's going to become a reality for us. And we need to keep that majority in the Minnesota Senate as well.
Great. Get ready, Paula and Adeline and others in ST 45. She's coming your way. Who else has a question for Melissa or Senator Murphy? And while you're thinking about that, you can either take yourself off mute or raise your hand. To answer a question in the chat, yes, this is being recorded, and this recording will be posted on our YouTube channel. And in the next couple days, we'll send out a follow-up email so that you will be able to view it and also forward it on to your friends. Okay, I see another question here. Melissa, you stressed the importance of early money for legislative success. Opportunities for early activism can also play a role. When do you anticipate being able to share your slate of target races and candidates for the 24 House election?
So it honestly is, I will say, is kind of frustratingly late. So I will say we are a district first organization, so we're always kind of eyeballing the districts that we will probably need to defend or challenge. But I believe that the filing deadline in Minnesota, and correct me if I'm wrong, Senator Murphy, is sometime in May or June. Yeah, so the filing deadline.
That's right.
Late May, early June. And so we really won't even know who exactly is running in each district until then. So it's after that, we'll know who's running. We'll know where there's serious primaries, if there are. We'll kind of have an evaluation that in the summer, which I know is like not a great, if everybody's chomping at the bit to go now, then let's focus on that special election. And when that gets set up, that's certainly one to get involved in right away, but it will probably be a little while before we're identifying our target districts.
Okay. All right. Another question is, can current legislators assist identifying potential candidates in their area? I particularly, this questioner, are concerned about rural areas.
We do rely on current elected officials to participate in recruiting in both the House and the Senate. And we recruit regionally, and we recruit, all across the state. I will, really reflect on the last election cycle. We had in the Senate a team of people. I chaired our caucus campaign, and we built a team of people, members, to participate in the recruiting. And of course, recruiting is there are a lot of hands in that work, right? There are people who are deeply engaged in their communities or in their Senate districts. I think about Kathy Olson in Senate District 45. There's not going to be a candidate that comes through without connecting with, learning from, getting support from Kathy Olson. So my colleagues and I are a part of that process. We worked very hard and I think recruited one of the best fields of candidates for the Minnesota Senate ever, including really strong candidates in rural districts who ran incredible campaigns. Many of them didn't win, but the way for us to change their trajectory in rural districts is to run strong candidates with strong messaging who are talking with the voters in those districts and moving that needle. And there were a number of them who did that beautiful work. And that contributes to not just the uptick at win, right? That helps Governor Walz and Keith Ellison and Julie Blaha, but it also helps all of us because it makes the next round of elections a little easier as we are advancing a message across the state of Minnesota. So yeah, my colleagues, both in the House and the Senate who are elected, will be helpful and are being tapped to do the recruiting necessary to find that strong slate of candidates to run across the state.
Okay.
Plus, it's a lot of fun.
It's fun and hard work, right?
Yeah, that's right.
How are we going to guide people to divide their support between local candidates and support for targeted candidates?
In my experience, people who decide to engage in electoral work either do it because they want to move an issue or because they believe in a candidate. And that's where they go. They either will go with, an issue like Moms Demand Action is a really good example, right? They organize people and they focus on where they think they can have the most impact. That's where their volunteers go. And then a lot of people end up, knocking for a candidate or a series of candidates. If we are working to support school board candidates, that supports legislative candidates. When we're supporting city council candidates, that's supporting legislative candidates. That'll support, Amy Klobuchar, and our congressional candidates. So, I always think about it sort of like a layer cake, because we're all impacted by the work that we're doing. And when we get to the height of the campaign, the end of the campaign, that is when it's the noisiest and the hardest time, right? Because you've got lots of volunteers who want to go to certain places, and we have to make sure we're spreading the volunteers out evenly so we turn out the vote across the state in an equitable way and with our eye on winning. So there you will see more effort on the part of, captains and people who are working in Senate districts and the coordinated campaign to make sure we've got the volunteers in the right places to turn out the vote to win the election.
We need volunteers.
I'd love to just jump in and add something if possible, which is just to say that something that I think about a lot is that people get their heads turned by individual candidates a lot of the time, right? And it's like, oh, this person's amazing. I really want to support this person. And that is awesome and important and a great gateway to real engagement and activism. And it is essential to focus on winning the majority. The majority is what makes that amazing person be able to actually have power. If they are not in the majority, they're observers in the chamber. And I think it's a really important thing to think about. There's never one person who's going to save us. We need the numbers of people coming together on an agenda and shifting policy. So one thing that I just want to share about the Minnesota Senate majority, when we were able to shift power, the majority, the makeup of the majority went from 19% women to 56% women. It went from 0% BIPOC folks to 26% BIPOC folks. And it went from 0% LGBTQ plus folks to 9% LGBTQ plus folks. We are changing who is at the decision-making table. We are changing who is holding the gavel. And that is an incredibly important thing. So when people think about investing in one candidate at a time, the big picture is really important. Which are the districts that we need to help this one person I love get into the majority? So it's just a nice way to look at it holistically.
Holistically. And what the Senate DFL caucus did with one vote majority to hold itself together was nothing short of miraculous. You all deserve so much credit. Okay, I think we have time for a few more questions. Where do you find campaign, I guess this is for you, Melissa, where do you find campaign managers for candidates, in state or out of state?
I have to be honest and say that I don't know the answer to that question. Emily, our regional political director for Minnesota, will know, so I can certainly ask her and get back to you. I don't know if Senator Murphy knows, but I'm not positive.
So there isn't one place. And in fact, until recently, campaign managers for legislative races were volunteers, and they still largely are volunteers, which means that people with maybe some, but not necessarily all of the experience that they need, are running these important races. One of the things that we did in the Senate last cycle was as we raised money, thank you again, and we were able to raise the money to put staff down early. We made sure that the candidates in the districts where we were targeting had both a field staffer and a person that functioned like a campaign manager, because we wanted to have as much professional staff on the ground as possible. And that does mean training and pay. When we pay people to do this work and we train them, they retain the skills necessary, and we're building a broader base of campaign managers. It is the case that when someone makes that hard decision and they say, I'm going to run, and then you say to them, well, now you have to find a campaign manager and you have to find a treasurer, you can pour a lot of cold water on the enthusiasm of a person who wants to do it. So it is, useful to have people who are building their skills that you can call on again and again until they decide they don't want to do campaign work anymore. And it's better off, we're better off in these races if we have people who have the opportunity for some real training, and to work as a cohort, campaign managers working together as a cohort, meeting certain standards. I love that idea of contests around door knocking, by the way, Melissa. So we did make a shift in the Minnesota Senate in this last cycle, and I think it really paid off. It really did focus the talent where we needed it, to win that majority, as Melissa was talking about earlier, and to build a skill set and a set of standards for our campaigns and the staff that were working for them that we had some say in and some control in.
Hey, Senator Murphy, here's a big question. Are DFLers in the legislature prepared to make solutions to improve healthcare via deprivatizing medical assistance and Minnesota Care, and ultimately enacting the single-payer Minnesota health plan a priority?
So there is a very significantly stronger Minnesota Health Plan caucus. So more and more of the members of the legislature, both the House and the Senate, understand the importance of creating a universal deprivatized plan here in the state of Minnesota. One of the critical steps on the path to doing that is the work that we started last session with the public option, a true public option that would be managed through the Department of Human Services, that would give us the opportunity to move the private health insurers out of our public programs, medical assistance and Minnesota Care. It is part of the unfinished business of 2023 and probably one of the hardest jobs that we have in 2024. So it is like close and near and dear to my heart. It is at the top of my list of things that I'm working on in the 24 session, to make sure that we are building the infrastructure to deliver on what we have promised people. And I think right now in Minnesota, for the first time in a long time, I worry a lot about the healthcare infrastructure that we have, not in a position to really serve the healthcare needs of the people of Minnesota. So, but I'm not alone in that. There are a number of our members who are feeling a lot of urgency around this issue. So I think healthcare will be a pretty significant issue in the 24 session and beyond.
Thank you. Okay, Melissa, you're up. With the ad testing you've done, this questioner is curious to hear about your insights on the effectiveness of negative and nasty flyers and ads compared with positive ad messaging.
Yeah, I saw that question come into the chat and I was thinking about it. I will say I don't have our ad testing data right at my fingertips, but I can certainly send some information around about it. I will tell you that I myself am a terrible judge of which ads people like, because I often will watch 3 and I'll say, oh, it's this one, it's this one, it's this one. And it is never the one I pick. And everyone makes fun of me and is like, oh, Brooklyn, like you don't know what flies in Minnesota or Arizona or in these districts. And they're right. And that is why we need to do local ad testing on these things. So I don't like negative ads. So I'm always like, no, not that one. But I did in Virginia this year, some of our candidates ran not really negative ads, but just really factual ads about opponents who had spoken about full abortion bans, had talked about really extreme positions on abortion, while Governor Youngkin was really positioning things as like, oh, we just want this moderate 15-week ban and don't worry about it. But meanwhile, the slate of candidates that he had supported were just on the public record talking about total bans. And so there were ads that were going out about that tested really well, just to kind of highlight the truth. So again, not a great personal judge of which ones work, and I shy away from negative ads, but most of our ads are mostly about building name recognition for the candidate who's running in the district. So they're often more of a more positive to do that. But I can also go back and get some actual data. That's just those are my anecdotal answers to that question.
That's great, and we'll follow up as best we can on any questions that you want to flesh out a little more in our follow-up. Leah, you are a great example to us all. She says, I live in Minneapolis and I knock doors in Cottage Grove. That's the example, what both Senator Murphy and Melissa have said about you find the person you like, and then you put all the rest of the picture together to say, how are we going to win this majority? Okay, one last question, and then we'll do a close. Melissa, this questioner says they understood that last year TSP invested in strengthening the DFL infrastructure early in the election cycle. Is that correct? And did some permanent changes get made to the DFL infrastructure? Well, this is for both of you, really, that make the DFL caucus a stronger entity.
I think that Senator Murphy's probably more well-positioned to answer that one than I am.
Great.
So we had a great campaign team in 2022. Megan Handel, who managed and led our campaigns, and a really, really spectacular staff. And we performed in all of the places that you would expect, in the field, in recruitment, in raising money, in message, and on the independent side. It was one of the best campaigns I've been a part of, and it was among my favorite. I mentioned already that we changed our staffing model. And I think that and the early hiring of staff on the ground, those two things together really set our candidates up, especially in the targeted races, to be successful when the races became the real contests that they were going to be. So I hope that is a change that we adopt permanently. And different people get involved in campaigns. Every cycle is a little different, and it's 3 years away for us. So, I intend to be here and to make sure that the things that we did in 2022, are the things that we bring forward. It is the case. We have seen this in the past, I think, in both caucuses and obviously in the Minnesota Senate, where you rely on a formula, and the formula gets a little stale. I think, it would have been great if we won in 2020, and we came very close in 2020. And I think that loss shook the Senate up in a way that made us review, really analyze what we were doing. And I will say both, the States Project played, I think, a heavy hand in that, and making sure that they were clear about the expectations in a campaign that they were willing to invest in. So again, States Project played a really, really important role from beginning to end in the victory that we had together in the fall. And those are the things that I pay attention to and want to hang on to as we head into the next election cycle.
Thank you so much. I'm going to hand it off to Susie Lewis, another Seed Minnesota co-leader, to wrap us up.
Hey, I better get unmuted. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
I have to go fast, folks, because Becky will give me the hook. So this is a really quick thank you very much, Melissa Walker, Senator Murphy. You two enlightened us, you energized us, you informed us. You were terrific. Thanks so much. I know you both have a lot to do. Thanks for being here. Thanks to all of you. We have really just one ask, believe it or not, and that is please ask your friends to join us. And we need to grow to meet our goal. We really do. Within a week, you're going to be getting an email from us. That'll be with the recording link from this program, from this event, a donation link, and other pertinent, important information. There is in the future a newsletter. We love our newsletter. We'll give you lots of great Minnesota information and other things to do. If you don't want to be on our mailing list, do us a favor, please, and just email us at seedminn@gmail.com. And just let us know that, and we'll take you off. But there's lots of opportunities, and it's your choice. A little bit, a lot, whatever you want. Donations are we love. Being in and starting a discussion group or a pod. We would love volunteering. We got lots of opportunities coming. When we get our supported candidates, we'll be out there. And lastly, the most important, we have fun. For example, we have been known to convert introverts into blooming extroverts while door knocking. So they have just, because they've learned to love it, and we really have a good time. So from all of us here, thanks for coming, everybody. Good night.
Good night.